Anybody that has used the 50mm f2 will tell you how amazing it is. Its compactness, its practicality with weather sealing, its sharpness. Basically, anyone that uses this lens loves it. But from the outside, it's such a hard sell. Why is that? Here's what I think is happening. I believe the name and obviously some of the technical specs are quite crippling when it comes to selling this lens. I think f2 is not an attractive number, and I think if you're not familiar with APS-C crop, then what the hell is a 50mm? You gotta constantly do this conversion. And of course you got the price. This lens is not cheap. So here's what I would like to do today. I wanna actually show you that these numbers don't really mean what you think they mean, and that they are even good numbers. All right, so let's start with that f2. Often we see 50mm with an f1.8 aperture. So to see an f2 is a bit odd, It really plays with your head a little bit. Like, what am I losing here? How much am I losing? I don't know why f2, but what I do want to tell you is that it doesn't matter, because this lens, you can actually shoot at f2 and it's sharp. You don't really gain that much with stopping it down. Most 50mm, especially budget entry 50mm, they need to be stopped down for you to gain some sharpness, even if they are advertised at f1.8 or 1.4 or whatever. But you don't have to do that here. And here's the big thing. f2 versus f2.8 is not actually as much of a difference as you would think. It's only half a stop difference. And to put that into perspective, here's what you gain with a half stop brighter lens. In a scenario where you would need to stop this lens down because, say, it wasn't sharp enough, then you're forced by its optics to stop down anyway to f2, sometimes f2.8. Again, this lens, you're good to shoot at f2. All right, the price. This one's a bit hard to really sell you on. However, I'm actually not gonna do that. If I were to still make a case for this, when it comes to the price, I would say, if you do care about your kit kind of matching, it's like build quality, then, the metal lens is nice to go along with the XT5. Especially that the fact that this comes in silver, that was a big thing for me. The weather sealing. If you take your camera traveling and you don't know what the weather is gonna be like, especially, going to more like, tropical places, then this will come in clutch for sure, All right, and finally, what the hell is a 50mm? Honestly, I think this is the biggest thing going here. 50mm on a crop sensor is more like a 75 or 76mm full frame equivalent. Okay, that's all that means. However, this makes the crop sensor system unique because you don't really have something like this in the full frame world. You don't really have a prime lens that's a 75mm. And I think a similar thing happens here, where just like how we have a 35mm on a full frame and a 50mm on full frame, and we have people on both sides saying, oh, I'm this type of shooter and I'm this type of shooter. And then you have people that will shoot on a 40mm, and it completely changes the way they think, the way they see stuff, and they now have converted and they swear by 40mm. There is something that 40mm is serving these people, even though it's close to 50mm and it's close to 35. However, it still stands out and it makes a case for itself, where people have completely re-rigged their setup to have a 40mm with them almost all the time. And I think that's what 75mm offers, is it's just that medium. It's not a 50, it's not an 85, but it's that in between. And it's so rare or oftentimes we don't really think about it when it comes to crop sensor bodies. I remember my first camera, my first DSLR was the T3i, and I could only have enough money to afford a nifty 50, for $100. That was very special for me because that's where I learned a lot of basically what these numbers meant. Where do I have to position myself? Can I shoot indoors with this thing? Can I shoot outdoors? Can I, what can I do and what can I not do? And so you just learn so much, but you're also adapting your brain to start thinking in net focal length, and you start taking these photos mentally in net focal length, and it's just such a cool thing, and you can replicate that. I remember with my Sony a7 III, I bought a 85mm thinking that I would have that, and I didn't. It was actually just a little bit tighter than what I'm used to, so I was just kind of hitting a wall with that body lens combination. And I was really missing, at the time I didn't know what it was, but it was actually this 75mm focal length. So, to summarize, the 50mm f2, again, if you shoot on this lens, you love this lens. And once you start understanding what this lens is, then you'll realize that it's honestly almost a perfect lens. This is something that is passionately celebrated by the Fuji community, and that is because experience. I would urge you to maybe even go out and test this lens if you have access to a camera shop near you. If you have any questions, I may be able to clarify them for you, so please leave them in the comments. And also leave me a like if you could. That would really help me a lot with this algorithm. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I really appreciate you. Take care.